There are 65 cameras for every 1,000 residents of London. It is the most surveilled city in Europe. The sheer amount of footage recorded means that by the law of averages, it will capture some crazy and some disturbing things. I am sharing with you 4 brand new cases and 2 bonus cases from the Dark Case archive. But that's enough from me, let's dive in. Love ya. On the evening of the 2nd of December 2006, 30-year-old Mark Blanco had dinner with friends in Wapping before returning to the George Tavern in East London. The pub manager remembered him as merry and in high spirits. He was preparing for a performance only 3 days away, and that night he believed he might have found the perfect person to invite. Mark was not simply an amateur actor drifting between London parties. He had studied philosophy at Trinity College, Cambridge, worked as a business consultant, and spent time at Goldman Sachs before deciding that the corporate world was not for him. He had lived in Paris, Australia and Salamanca, collected antiquarian books and performed close-up card magic. His mother, Sheila Blanco, described him as exuberant, generous and intensely curious, with a love of literature and a refusal to tolerate people he considered foolish or dishonest. Mark had been cast as the central character in a production of Dario Fo's Accidental Death of an Anarchist at the George. The play was inspired by the real death of Giuseppe Pinelli, an Italian anarchist who fell from a police station window in 1969. That detail would later give the events of Mark's final night an unsettling resemblance to the play he was about to perform. At around 11:30, Mark heard that Pete Doherty was at a gathering nearby. Doherty was one of Britain's most recognisable musicians, known as the frontman of the Libertines and later Baby Shambles. His songs, public relationships and well-documented struggles with illegal substances had made him a constant presence in the British press. His background was very different from the chaotic image surrounding him by 2006. Doherty had been raised in a military family. His father, Peter, rose to the rank of Major in the Royal Signals. His mother, Jacqueline, had served in Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps before working as a registered nurse. The family moved between military bases during his childhood, but his increasing dependence on substances later placed enormous strain on those relationships. Mark was excited by the possibility of persuading Doherty to attend the play. Carrying a bottle of wine, he left the George and walked to the Whitechapel flat of Paul Roundhill. Roundhill was often described as Doherty's literary agent and was involved in selling artwork produced by the musician. His flat had been nicknamed the Hotel in the Sky and was widely known as a destination for heavy substance use. Although Roundhill has disputed some descriptions of the property, only 6 people were reportedly inside that night. CCTV recorded Mark arriving at approximately 12:13 in the morning. Doherty arrived 2 minutes later with his 19-year-old girlfriend, Kate Russell Pavier. Also present were Roundhill, Doherty's minder Johnny Geneval, known as Johnny Headlock, and 2 women named Annabelle Heald-Smith and Naomi Stirk. Mark had expected an opportunity to discuss his performance. Instead, the atmosphere became hostile. Accounts of the confrontation differ, but Roundhill has acknowledged striking Mark and dragging him from the flat. He also admitted pouring lighter fluid onto Mark's tweed cap and briefly setting it alight. Roundhill described the burning cap as an unconventional attempt at humour, intended to distract Mark and calm the situation. Sheila viewed it as part of a humiliating physical attack, in which her son's jacket was also torn. At approximately 12:25, Mark was forced from the flat. 2 minutes later, CCTV showed him returning to the building. Perhaps he wanted his belongings. Perhaps he wanted to finish the confrontation or dispute about what had been done to him. No recording captured his words, and the surviving witnesses have never provided a single undisputed account of what followed. Just 56 seconds after Mark re-entered the building, he somehow fell over the first-floor balcony. The fall was approximately 11 feet and 7 inches. CCTV captured Mark travelling backwards and outwards, but the balcony itself remained outside the camera's view. There was no footage showing whether he approached the railing voluntarily, lost his balance, or was accompanied by anyone else. He struck the street with catastrophic force. A neighbor named Paul Ellis heard shouting and looked through his window. He saw Mark lying in the gutter, a dark-haired woman screaming nearby, and another woman standing close to the scene. Ellis had basic first aid training, so he went outside, checked Mark's breathing, and covered him with his cardigan and jacket. The camera then recorded behavior that would haunt Sheila for years. Pete Doherty came downstairs and approached Mark. Footage appeared to show him standing near or stepping over the critically injured man before running back inside. Roughly 15 seconds after Mark's fall, Doherty, Russell Pavia, and Headlock were seen leaving the building. Doherty has said he panicked because he was carrying illegal substances and feared being arrested. He later expressed regret for running away and has always denied having any involvement in Mark's fall. The emergency call was not received until approximately 12:43, around 14 minutes after Mark landed in the street. Doherty and girlfriend Russell Pavia left the area in a taxi before paramedics arrived at 12:57. Mark reached the Royal London Hospital at approximately 1:17. His head injuries were too severe, and he died in the early hours of the 4th of December. Doherty continued to a hotel in Clerkenwell. At 2:25 that morning, police were called following reports that he had disrupted a wedding gathering, damaged hotel property, and become involved in a disturbance. He had reportedly left before officers arrived. The initial explanation for Mark's death was that he had either fallen accidentally or deliberately jumped. Sheila rejected both possibilities. Her son had suffered from extreme vertigo. She said he avoided exposed heights and would never willingly have approached the edge of a balcony. He had also been happy only hours earlier, had a performance scheduled, and had entered the flat specifically to invite Doherty to attend. The subject of that play complicated the case further. Roundhill eventually suggested that Mark may have jumped as a theatrical or creative statement connected to the play, The Accidental Death of an Anarchist. Doherty later expressed a similar view, saying Mark was alone and had either fallen or been attempting to make an extreme point about art imitating life. The coroner ruled out that Mark did this on purpose and returned an open verdict. By then, Sheila had already begun identifying failures in the original investigation. The day after the fall, she visited the street and found a lens from Mark's glasses still lying in the gutter. His glasses and his watch, specifically an £800 Tag Heuer, were initially missing from the possessions that were returned. A police officer had reportedly placed them in a locker before going on leave and had simply forgotten that they existed. Mark's clothing was never subjected to the comprehensive forensic examination Sheila believed it required. 3 weeks after the death, on Christmas morning, Johnny Geneval, or Headlock, walked into Bethnal Green Police Station and confessed to killing Mark.
I phoned the police and I just said to them, yeah, I killed him, but I don't know why. I got in the cell and I was lying down, I was thinking, somewhere to sleep at night. And then I was lying down, I was thinking, hold on man, I've opened a can of worms here. Because it was just sort of dying down, I think. And I thought, no man. And then I just started knocking on the door. I said, no, can you let me out, man? I didn't really do it.
He withdrew the statement hours later, explaining that public accusations and stress had become overwhelming. He subsequently denied responsibility, including directly to Sheila. The confession did not resolve the case, but it became another piece of information that Sheila believed had not been handled properly. Police re-investigated, yet prosecutors concluded there was not enough evidence to prove that Mark had been pushed, thrown, or dropped. Crucially, they could not establish that another person had been on the balcony with him at the moment he fell. Independent specialists hired by the family later examined the footage and Mark's injuries. Professor Richard Wassersuk concluded that two of the most likely explanations were that Mark had been backed against the railing and pushed, or that he was already unconscious and was dropped over it. Forensic video expert John Kennedy noted that Mark displayed no visible defensive movement during the fall. Grant Fredericks, who taught at the FBI National Academy, said the footage was consistent with a person being carried and released over the balcony edge. Those findings challenged the idea of a simple accident, but they could not identify who might have carried out such an act. Doherty, Roundhill, Headlock and the other guests have denied responsibility, and no one has been charged. There were other disturbing details surrounding the location. 5 years earlier, Irish musician Paul Cuniff had also died after a fall connected with the same flat. The circumstances of that incident were never fully established, and its existence does not prove any connection to Mark's death. It did, however, deepen the unease surrounding the building. Sheila has now spent almost 2 decades reconstructing a period lasting little more than an hour. She has collected statements, commissioned analysis, challenged police decisions, and pursued fresh reviews. New material has since been presented to the City of London Police, while a victim's right to review process has examined the decision not to prosecute. The central sequence is remarkably short, with perhaps the most important moment lasting just 56 seconds. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts on this one, so just drop a comment below and we can talk it out. On the 27th of April 2018, 91-year-old Sir Robert Malpass was making an ordinary journey through central London. The retired industrialist had once helped lead some of Britain's largest companies, serving as a managing director of BP and later as co-chairman of Eurotunnel. That afternoon, however, he was simply returning from a pensioner's lunch, travelling with his Freedom Pass and heading towards the Central Line. Sir Robert walked along the platform at Marble Arch, wearing a brown Burberry raincoat over a suit and tie. He carried an umbrella and had no reason to pay attention to the man approaching from behind him. That man was Paul Crossley. Only minutes earlier, Crossley had been at Tottenham Court Road Station, where he had suddenly tried to force another passenger, Tobias French, towards the tracks as a train arrived. Tobias was a professional sportsman, and his balance may have saved him. He resisted the attack, remained on the platform and escaped what could easily have become a fatal fall. Crossley fled and continued through the underground. At Marble Arch, CCTV recorded him, noticing Sir Robert and moving directly towards him. Without warning, he placed both hands against the elderly man's back and pushed. His pelvis was fractured, his head struck the track and his umbrella fell beside him. The next train was due in approximately 1 minute. People on the platform screamed, but one man immediately began running. Teacher Riyad El Hassani covered roughly 20 meters before jumping down onto the tracks. As he landed, his hand briefly touched an electrified rail, leaving him with a burn. He continued anyway, reaching Sir Robert and moving him towards the platform edge. Other passengers leaned down and helped pull the injured man back to safety. Sir Robert spent more than a week in hospital. The wound on his head required 12 stitches, and the fractured pelvis left him facing a long recovery. Riyadh's intervention had taken only moments, but without it, British Transport Police believed the case could have become part of a double fatality investigation. Members of the public chased and restrained Crossley after the attack. Investigators learned that he had paranoid schizophrenia, had not taken his medication that day, and had used approximately £600 worth of illicit stimulants the previous day. He said he had become paranoid and had heard voices, but the judge concluded that substance use and aggression, rather than schizophrenia alone, had driven the attacks. Crossley was convicted of attempting to end the lives of both Sir Robert and Tobias. He received a life sentence with a minimum term of 12 years, initially to be served in hospital before transfer to prison. Sir Robert eventually recovered enough to walk and resume his normal affairs. He lived for another 5 years, dying in June 2023 at the age of 95. The CCTV remains disturbing, but it also captured something else, a selfless act from a perfect stranger. On the 4th of March 2018, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia left his home in Salisbury and began what appeared to be an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Sergei was a former Russian military intelligence officer who had passed information to Britain. After being arrested in Russia, he had eventually been released as part of a spy exchange and settled in England. Friends knew that returning to Russia was not an option for him. He had reportedly warned one neighbor that Vladimir Putin would get him if he ever went back. But on that Sunday morning, there was no visible indication that Sergei and Yulia were already in danger. However, the front door handle of Sergei's house had been coated with Novichok, an extremely dangerous nerve agent. Sergei touched the handle as he left the property, Yulia, who stayed inside briefly to finish getting ready, then also touched it afterwards. Neither of them immediately realised what had happened. They drove into Salisbury, visited the Mill pub and ate at a branch of ZZ. Their movements were later reconstructed using CCTV as counter-terrorism officers attempted to establish when and where they had been exposed. At some stage during the afternoon, the pair stopped near the river, where children were feeding ducks. Sergei handed a young boy a piece of bread so that he could join in. It was the kind of small interaction that would normally have been forgotten within minutes. Sergei had no way of knowing that his hands may have carried traces of a chemical weapon. He and Yulia continued through the city, but their conditions soon began to deteriorate. They were later found collapsed on a bench. Sergei was sitting upright and staring ahead, while Yulia lay beside him in an unusual position. Two off-duty medical professionals stopped to help. Neither knew that they might be approaching the scene of a nerve agent poisoning. One initially thought the pair could be suffering from food poisoning or the effects of drugs. The discovery triggered one of the largest and most complicated police investigations in modern Britain. Officers searched locations across Salisbury, removed vehicles and contaminated objects, and worked to understand how far the substance might have travelled. Detectives also had to trace everyone who may have come into contact with Sergei and Yulia while they were moving through the city. That search led them back to the boy with the bread and two other children who had been with him. All three reportedly became unwell for a day or two following the encounter. By the time they were located and tested several weeks later, however, no trace of Novichok was found on them. It was impossible to confirm that the bread had made them ill, but just that possibility was incredibly haunting. Sergei and Yulia ultimately survived. At 7:40 on the morning of the 5th of May 2017, commuters were crossing Putney Bridge when a runner appeared on the pavement. He wore a light grey t-shirt, dark shorts and trainers, moving towards a 33-year-old woman walking close to the road. As they passed, the runner extended his arm and shoved her sideways. She fell directly into the path of a red double-decker bus. Her head landed dangerously close to its wheels, leaving the driver, Oliver Salbris, almost no time to react. He swerved sharply into the next lane, avoiding her by inches. The runner never stopped. Passengers helped the woman from the road. She escaped with minor injuries, but was shaken and crying. Oliver got out, checked on her and left his name, route number and contact details. He later said turning the wheel had been pure reflex. Without it, the consequences would have been devastating for them both. What happened next made the incident even harder to wrap your head around, and a lot more infuriating. Around 15 minutes later, the same runner returned across the bridge. The woman tried to confront him, but he ignored her and continued north towards the River Thames. When police released the CCTV footage 3 months later, millions watched the brief encounter. The unidentified jogger became known as the Putney Pusher, and the clarity of the images created an expectation that he would quickly be found. Instead, the investigation stalled. More than 50 people were considered, and 3 men were arrested before being cleared and released without charge. One suspect proved he had been in the United States at the time. By June 2018, every available lead had been exhausted, and the inquiry was closed. For years, the footage remained one of London's most recognisable unsolved CCTV cases. It was discussed online, examined by amateur investigators, and eventually inspired a stage play, presenting the incident from the perspectives of the victim, the driver, and the runner. Then, 9 years after the push, new information reopened the trail. On the 15th of June 2026, police arrested a 44-year-old man at his £1.4 million home in West London on suspicion of attempted grievous bodily harm. He was a city banker. He was also arrested on suspicion of possessing Class A and Class B substances. The man was later released on bail while inquiries continued. For the first time in nearly a decade, the case was no longer entirely cold, although responsibility and, more importantly, justice was still up in the air.
No comment.
The car stank, didn't it, Gemma?
comment.
Stunk of a dead person.
No comment.
Stunk of Deborah's decomposing body. Is that right, Gemma?
No comment.
When we meet someone that is at a vulnerable stage in their life, most of us take the opportunity to exhibit the best side of ourselves. This, for most of us, is just a natural part of what it is to be human, and the reward for our actions is simply that we helped, and nothing more. However, there are an evil few. These few see a vulnerability, and they also see an opportunity. But it's not an opportunity to help or to show humanity. It's an opportunity to gain, to hurt, and to act in an inhuman way. The case of Deborah Chong, sadly, is a disturbing example of the latter. Viewer discretion is very much advised. Mi Quen Chong, 67, stood at 5 foot 2 inches tall and was of slight build. Mi Quen Chong, or Deborah Chong as she was known to her friends, shared a home in Wembley with David Klein, a crane operator. Deborah was sadly widowed, a fact that also means she was very financially comfortable. It was said that Deborah was somewhat vulnerable. She suffered with mental health difficulties and had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Her behaviour could be erratic and sometimes verbally aggressive. Deborah was open about her financial affairs. She had a habit of offering to leave her home to others after her death and offering people money. Many refused, but some did not. In 2021, her mental state appears to have been deteriorating. In March 2021, she was referred to the local community mental health team because she kept sending letters to Prince Charles and Boris Johnson. They contained nothing alarming but were sufficiently bizarre to suggest that she may be suffering a relapse. As a result, in May 2021, she was treated with an injection of an antipsychotic medication. Deborah was a devout Christian and had an interest in spiritual healing. She was at a vulnerable time in her life, so when she met a new friend at a church group in August of 2020, she welcomed the companionship. This new friend was Gemma Mitchell. Gemma also became Deborah's spiritual healer. 38-year-old Gemma Mitchell was a resident of Bronsbury Park in northwest London. She was born on the 22nd of July 1984 and raised in Australia, where her mother Hilary worked for the British Foreign Office. It was said that when Gemma's parents' marriage broke down, she moved back to the UK with her mother and her sister. In 2004, she began studying human sciences at King's College London, from where she graduated with a first-class honours degree. During her degree course, she completed a module called The Structural Basis of Human Function, in which she was taught how to dissect the entire human body. She also completed an additional study course in experimental anatomy. Such was her aptitude for anatomy, she was awarded the Hamilton Prize for Anatomical Excellence. In 2009, she completed a degree course in osteopathy, which included modules on the anatomy, biomechanics, and pathophysiology of the human body. She then went back to Australia to resume her osteopathy practice. According to her own website, she was attuned to subjects in neuroanatomy, genetics, and dissection of human cadavers. She had been working as an osteopath for roughly 7 years when she returned to the UK once more in 2015. Since that time, Gemma returned to live in the family home with her mother. The family has owned that home for many years, a home that Gemma claimed to be worth £4 million. However, the house was in poor condition. Mother Hilary made the decision to add a third floor to the home in 2016. She entrusted Gemma with managing the project and getting the house back in shape. However, Gemma paid one builder £130,000, but they then filed for bankruptcy. The money was lost. A second company offered a £500,000 fee to complete the project. Gemma paid this company £100,000, but the remaining balance was never paid, and they laid down tools in 2019. This means that the house remained without a roof and covered in scaffolding until the time that this case is set. Mother Hilary said that Gemma worked day and night to attempt to raise the money to resolve the issues that she had caused. So when Deborah met Gemma, she was in the midst of restoring her home, and she urgently needed money to finish the project. Not long after meeting, Deborah openly spoke about her good financial situation with Gemma. Deleted messages were later recovered from Gemma's phone and computer, in which she discussed who was due to inherit Deborah's money and property once she passed away. The fact these messages were deleted does not bode well. In one email, Deborah told Gemma, "I am honoured to have you as my sister, accept me as your friend and advise me." The advice that Gemma was giving was twofold. She was indeed Deborah's spiritual healer, but she was also giving financial guidance. She spoke about the option of Deborah leaving her home to charity in order to avoid inheritance tax. One idea was that Gemma would create a charity with Deborah's lodger, David Klein. However, David did not want to get involved in the scheme. On the 19th of September 2020, Gemma messaged Deborah saying, "I would like to join a charity with you if David is reluctant to change his ways. I like accounting. Or you could transfer the house to me and pay into the charity each month." By November 2020, just a couple of months into their friendship, Gemma had now gained the confidence of Deborah. They shared numerous messages in which they discussed the work that needed to be done on Gemma's home, and others discussing which builders could be used to carry out the work, and that Deborah was offering to pay for the repairs to be carried out. A message found on Deborah's phone from December 2020 stated that she would like to meet Gemma's mother, Hilary. Hilary was, after all, the owner of the home that she was looking to invest a lot of money into, not Gemma. When Deborah and Hilary met, Deborah did agree to give £200,000, but only if the property was used as part of the Christian community and was used for Christian worship. Further messages retrieved from Deborah's phone from May 2021 backed up the agreement from their meeting, suggesting that the house should become used as a Christian ministry. However, for reasons that we do not know, Deborah changed her mind on the deal. She removed her offer of financing the work on this dilapidated home. Around a month after the offer was taken off the table, Deborah was seen out and about, live and well on CCTV footage. On the footage, Deborah can be seen speaking with her neighbour. Messages between Deborah and Gemma were exchanged where Deborah confirmed that she had had a change of heart. On the 8th of June 2021 at 1 AM, a message was sent that said, "Until you've sold the house, I won't want you to come to me or my house. I am stressed to the core." Gemma responded, "Peace to you. God has a plan and purpose for this dwelling." More messages were exchanged and Deborah pleaded Gemma to let go of the house and the past and to sell the house. Gemma responded that she couldn't do that. "We have prayed on the options extensively and we even brought estate agents in, but it's not in God's plan." David Klein, Deborah's tenant, reported seeing her for the last time on June 10th, 2021. On June 11th, David left for work, leaving Deborah home alone. Police said at 6:23 AM, Gemma left her home address at 9 Bronsby Park, Willesden. CCTV footage filmed by a camera situated opposite the house shows that she had with her a large blue wheeled suitcase. Although it is large, it does not appear to be particularly heavy. She's able to lift it off the ground with one hand, and walks away from the house with it without difficulty and at a relatively quick pace in the general direction of Bronsbury Park Station. It appears that she travelled to Stonebridge Park Station using her mother's Freedom Pass. By 7:58 AM, she reached Chaplin Road, where she was filmed walking in the direction of Deborah's house along the pavement opposite. At 8:01 AM, she was captured by a camera situated a little further along Chaplin Road at number 184. She had crossed over the road and was walking in the direction of Deborah's house. Then, shortly after 1 PM on the 11th of June, Gemma was captured on CCTV walking away from Deborah's house, now in possession of 2 suitcases, a large blue suitcase and a smaller red and blue suitcase. After wandering around with the suitcases for approximately 2 hours, Gemma took a cab home. Lodger David returned to Deborah's house later that evening. At 10:48 PM, he contacted the police and reported Deborah missing, telling them that he had not seen Deborah since the evening before, and that Deborah had left both her mobile telephone and her glasses behind. Contained in the suitcase was Deborah's body. Gemma carried the body of her friend still in the suitcase through her house and into the garden. Deborah stayed there for 2 weeks, in the garden of the house that Gemma shared with her elderly mother. the very same house that Deborah was, at one time, going to invest in as a place of worship. During these 2 weeks, Gemma made a false report via email to a missing persons charity, an email designed to get her off the hook. Gemma also messaged Deborah's lodger, David, on WhatsApp and informed him that Deborah had gone to visit relatives for a year to unwind and that she intended to stay somewhere close to the ocean. Remember those words as this case unfolds. Somewhere close to the ocean. They seem to be revealed as a sick joke. On the 26th of June, Gemma hired a silver Volvo and she headed to the small coastal town of Salcombe in Devon in southwest England. During the journey, the Volvo suffered a puncture. Gemma pulled the car into a petrol station to get help. The roadside assistance worker that came to change the tyre reported that Mitchell appeared confused and that the interior of the car had an odd, musty smell. The Volvo driven by Gemma was then seen on CCTV heading towards some woodland. On Sunday, June the 27th, 2021, Charlotte Rolling and their family went for a walk in Salcombe. Police said as they walked back to their holiday cottage from the beach, they made a gruesome discovery.
Emergency. Hi, I just found a body. Oh, go ahead, caller. What's your emergency? I just found a body. Right, okay. A body, is it? Are they breathing? No, they're dead. They look like they've possibly been there like a few days or something with some flies and stuff. Right, okay. Bear with me a second. Let's pop this on. What's the road? Yeah, what road are you on? I'm in Salcombe. You're in Salcombe, sorry. Let me have a look. I can populate, hopefully, where you are. So, Bennett Road, are you quite near the harbour? We're up from North Sand Beach. Hang on, we'll just look at Google Maps. Oh, okay, yeah, so I can see North Sand Bay. Bennett Road, yeah, you are on Bennett Road.
On a public walkway, the body had been lying at the bottom of some steps. Police then arrived and cordoned off the area. When Mrs. Rollings said that they had found a body, she meant just that. No head was present. Post-mortem investigations said that the body had been passed for some days by this stage. Decomposition caused a delay in identification. On June the 30th, after hearing that a body had been found in Salcombe, Gemma must have realised that it was Deborah's. She then filed a second false complaint to the missing persons charity through email. She said that Deborah had contacted her to say that she felt neglected and was staying with family by the sea. Gemma had also faked a duplicate of Deborah's will. In this version of the will, Gemma was guaranteed to receive 95% of Deborah's estate. Disturbingly, a few days later, on July the 1st, Deborah's head was found around 10 metres from the location of the body, hidden within vegetation. There were signs of blunt force trauma to the head. Once the identity of the body was confirmed to be that of Deborah Chong, police developed suspicions about Gemma Mitchell. On July the 6th, Gemma was arrested at her home but refused to answer any questions.
Police! Hello there.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good. There's no answer. Sorry, what's your name?
Sorry, we're asleep.
Are you Gemma?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, Gemma. Just put your hand a second.
Sure, sure.
Come on a second.
Sorry, can I ask
Gemma, do you want to come up?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want to see them.
Hand just so your hands. Alright, Gemma, at this moment, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but you may have a defence if you want to mention one question, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence, okay? Once we're in the cuffs,
Am I allowed to...
I'll go explain everything to you. Okay?
Should I get some
Yeah,
shoes
sorry.
on?
What?
If you want to one sec.
Inside?
Who's inside at the moment?
Mother.
Your mother?
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to... Oh, because someone left that up.
Yeah. Let's step back inside.
Is anyone else inside? Just your mum?
Yeah.
There is someone else inside,
No,
or just your
that's
mum?
just my mum, yeah.
Alright, do you want to... Should I bring her out, or...
Bring her in.
Bring her in?
For a minute,
Right,
yeah.
we're just going to come in for a sec, okay?
Sure.
She was now being formally accused of murdering Deborah.
And they've said that the person driving the Volvo waited in the car all that time with the windows down and the front door open, the passenger door open, when it was literally chucking it down with rain and it was windy. Why is that, Gemma?
No comment.
The car stank, didn't it, Gemma?
No comment.
Stunk of a dead person.
No comment.
Stunk of Deborah's decomposing body. that right, Gemma?
No comment.
Following her arrest, more incriminating and disturbing evidence was found in her home. Disturbingly, identity paperwork from Gemma's deceased neighbour from May 2021 was also discovered. Gemma used this neighbour's ID and mobile phone to hire the Volvo in which she drove to Salcombe. On December the 23rd, 2021, Gemma Mitchell appeared via video link at the Old Bailey to confirm her identity. She was remanded in custody after entering a not guilty plea. In October of 2022, the trial took place. On Thursday, October the 27th, 2022, Judge Marks said,
"As to aggravating features, there are the following. Firstly, the amount of planning and premeditation that went into this offence, although it is right to acknowledge that this is bound to be an invariable feature of a killing done for gain, and I must avoid double counting in that regard. Secondly, there is the issue of Deborah's mental and physical vulnerability, to which I have already referred, and of which you were very well aware. Thirdly, there is the chilling aspect of what you did to and with her body. The enormity of your crime is profoundly shocking, even more so given your apparent religious devotion, as well as the fact that Deborah Chong was a good friend to you and had shown you great kindness. The sentence of the court is one of life imprisonment, and the minimum term of imprisonment that you will in any event be required to serve will be 34 years. Would you please take the defendant downstairs?"
Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? Let me know in the comments.
I'm taking it further. Either I'm 76, and if it takes me until I die, I'm going to contest it because it's not right.
Mitchell's never accepted responsibility for Deborah's murder, so there are certain questions which may remain unanswered. Why she kept her body for over a fortnight, why she decapitated her, and why she deposited her remains in Salcombe. But what we do know is that it was an evil act carried out by an evil woman, and the only motive clearly was one of financial gain.
Just a quick one. For some reason, my videos are normally seen by just 1 to 2% of my subscribers. I actually don't know why. Regardless of the reasons, it's making it extremely challenging to keep this show on the road. And I promise I don't like to do this. It makes me feel like Oliver Twist or something. But please do consider becoming a channel member. There are currently 343 of you, and I'm aiming for the crazy goal of 1,000 by the end of 2026. You get things like early access to videos, our behind the scenes podcast, and of course my eternal gratitude. Thank you, and I love you all. Now back to the video.
I'm afraid I'm bleeding badly. Help for me. The ambulance police are on the way to you. I've already called them and just trying to say where you are.
This is the emotionally draining case of the UK's very own Night Stalker. It's 1997, a quiet springtime in Lewisham, England. In Brockley Mews, a cul-de-sac with only 19 homes, everything is still. It was a quiet close with rail tracks on one side and Honour Oak Crematorium on the other. The cul-de-sac sat near some of South London's busiest roads, but it was itself quiet enough to see children playing in the road in the summertime. A leafy barrier of trees protects a terrace of 3-storey homes from the railway track opposite. Taking advantage of the sheltered feel of the mews, the neighbours bring their garden chairs out into the street to hold barbecues and domino games. It was pretty much a picture-perfect place to live, and in the last house on the left lived a happy family. The wife was wheelchair-bound, the husband, a former carpenter and minicab driver, was her full-time carer. It might sound challenging, but they seemed happy. He was a number one to all of us on the street because he was so kind to her and so gentle, said Ray, a neighbour. He would take her on day trips if the weather was nice and come to my allotment to pick up fresh vegetables for her. The house was strikingly neat and clean, exceptionally tidy. There wasn't a speck of dirt and nothing was out of place. An almost ideal family home. The family were Jehovah's Witnesses. On a Saturday, they would come out in their smart suits and all go off to church together. The boys were friendly but respectful. They were always smiling, the neighbour added. The dad was definitely very attentive and caring. He was affectionate. They were a nice family. But no one could have suspected what was going on behind closed doors. The nice family in the last house on the picture-perfect street had a dark secret. Everything was not as it seemed. It was the 12th of October 1992. In Orpington, Kent, an 89-year-old woman was settling down to sleep in her bungalow when a loud noise woke her. She thought it was her neighbour, who often worked late shifts. It wasn't unusual for them to clang and clash as they let themselves into their door. Not everyone is careful or considerate, so she wasn't worried. Now fully awake, she headed to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea. Once back in bed, she settled down with a book. As she turned a page, suddenly she felt eyes burning into her. There was a figure standing in her doorway. She saw a man. His face was covered by a balaclava. He moved towards the end of the bed, blinding her with the torch, shining it directly at her eyes. She tried to ask whether he wanted money. He shouted at her to be quiet. She scrambled for her purse, giving him everything she had. It was around £25 in notes and coins, not a lot, but he wasn't there for money. He unscrewed the bulb from her lamp, then forced a black glove over her face and mouth, leaving her feeling like she was being smothered. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't see, but she could hear. The man whispered, "Don't scream, I won't hurt you." But that simply wasn't true. He intimately violated her. The pain she felt was inexplainable. "He was really brutal, I just wanted him to stop. The pain was awful," she said. The man went to the bathroom and when he returned, he threw her a towel for her to use. He then picked up his gloves from the floor and left. The woman, who suffered from osteoarthritis, had cuts to her lips. She also had horrific injuries to her waist and hips which required major surgery. The ordeal was terrifying and lasted what felt like hours. But crucially, there was DNA evidence left behind. When police reached the bungalow, they found an unsettling scene. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was well thought out. It was meticulous. The light bulbs had all been unscrewed. The electricity meter had been switched off and the telephone wires had been ripped out. The window had been removed to allow easy access and as to not cause any noise. But even with DNA evidence, the culprit had been too smart. The case simply went cold. His next offence occurred in 1998. This time he subjected an 81-year-old woman to burglary, indecent assault and other attempted intimate violations. Again, a DNA sample was left at the scene which allowed the crimes to be linked. But this was the 1990s. DNA just wasn't enough to catch him. Britain's National Police DNA database contained samples from anyone arrested for a recordable offence after 1995. But when they ran the samples of his DNA, they were coming up blank. It appeared that the suspect wore gloves every time, so there were no fingerprints. The hunt was on for a serial predatory individual attacking the elderly. In 1999, he struck again, this time in Beckingham, Colston, Croydon, Kent and Orpington. He burgled 6 times, indecently assaulted 4 times and intimately violated 2 elderly women. Many of his victims, aged between their 70s and 80s, were blind, deaf or suffered from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. One of his victims, who had only just returned from a hospital stay, told how she was awoken in the early hours of the morning in August 1999, seeing a man shining a torch in her face as he removed the bulb from her bedside lamp. He again had gained entry by removing a pane of glass in the living room window. The 88-year-old woman who lived on her own in Croydon said, "I was shocked, petrified, dumbstruck. I did not know what to do." He pulled away her bedsheet, undid his trousers and grabbed her arm, forcing her to touch him. The woman pulled her hand away, quickly saying, What would your mother think of you if she could see you now? She was terrified and shocked. She was just staring at his face, paralysed with fear, wondering how long it would go on for. But to her surprise, it wouldn't be long. The mention of her assailant's mother was enough. Without harming her further, he left the woman in her bedroom, ransacked the house, and then left. The predator wasn't always cold and combative. The victims, who were both men and women aged between 68 and 93, said he would kiss them on the cheek, take their pulse, or engage in conversation with them for hours, before ultimately assaulting them in their beds. Even as he ransacked homes and terrorized them, he somehow showed compassion to some of his victims. He helped one to a chair and then back to bed while he was breaking into her home. At times, he almost seemed caring. He knew how to support a frail elderly individual, carefully holding the elbow to guide his victims around their homes. This made the police suspect that he had a background as a caregiver. In one case, he took a woman's pulse and after attacking her, he apologized to her. He said, "I'm really sorry. I won't do this again." But despite these fleeting moments of compassion, his reign of terror continued across South London, and he wasn't always so compassionate. In a particularly egregious attack on August 5th, 1999, he violated his victim twice and left her bleeding from internal injuries which nearly proved fatal.
I'm breaking, I'm bleeding badly. Can you please get some help for me? The ambulance police are on the way to you. I've already called them. I'm just trying to say where you are.
In a later attack, he broke into an elderly Polish man's house in Croydon. He'd robbed the same house once before. This time, the 88-year-old man hadn't gone to bed yet. On this occasion, the perpetrator showed no compassion. Disturbingly, he intimately violated him. But this act wasn't for gratification. Instead, it was to embarrass the elderly man into not calling the police. Sadly, this was an effective method of silencing the elderly. It was believed that the predator had committed over 200 offences, but only a handful were reported. The media named the man the Night Stalker. He often took money, but only in small amounts. He also took credit cards and obtained pins from his victims, but there was no record of him ever using them. With so many offences, so many victims, and so many opportunities to catch him, it really is a wonder that he was able to continue for so long. In 1998, the police launched Operation Minstead after detectives forensically linked an offence in 1997 in South London to the first known case back in 1992. With no identity for their suspect, they nicknamed him the Minstead Man, and break-ins and characteristic signs became known as Minstead burglaries. Operation Minstead was the largest and possibly most controversial investigation Britain had ever seen. By 2001, there were 73 cases linked to the Night Stalker. DNA was found at most scenes, but as with the early cases, there was no DNA link to the national database. The Minstead Man was careful not to be caught. Detective Superintendent Simon Morgan took charge of the investigation. Looking through the case notes, he realised that the perpetrator had a distinctive method. From flattened grass found in the victim's gardens, police could see that the Night Stalker was prepared to wait for hours until he knew for certain that the victim had gone to bed. He'd attack by carefully and quietly removing the whole window in one piece to gain entry. He would move any ornaments away from the windowsills to avoid making noise as he entered. He'd switch off the electricity supply at the mains, cut the telephone wires, and unscrew light bulbs around the house. He also placed any mobile phones above cupboards, making them harder to find. The police had little to go on. Descriptions from his victims suggested a black male aged between 25 and 40. He was described as about 5'9" to 5'11" tall, of slim athletic build and tending to wear darker clothing. He was usually wearing gloves, a mask or balaclava, and occasionally a baseball cap. He was also described as being softly spoken. Some of his victims reported a curious, sweet smell. Most victims were so traumatized, they were unable to recall any further details. It was left to behavioral profilers to help shine some light. They detected that he must have worked with the elderly at some point. He used similar techniques when lifting and moving his victims. They also worked out that he must have worked at night, as his comings and goings didn't arouse suspicions. In nearly every case, the police were astounded at just how clean and tidy he was. It was believed that the person they were hunting must have had obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. He was described as a gerontophile, someone drawn to older women for carnal gratification who often spends times in his victims' homes. D.S. Simon Morgan said that he believed that he enjoyed the domesticity of being with elderly people, but even with the profile, they were coming up short. In order to move forward with the case, the police decided to use a pioneering new technique called ancestral DNA profiling. It concluded that both of his parents originated from the Caribbean. This pointed towards Caribbean, probably the Windward Islands, St. Lucia, Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Tobago or Trinidad. More than 50 police staff volunteered to provide further samples that narrowed the profile down to the Windward Islands. Operation Minstead identified around 21,000 possible suspects that fitted such a profile. In 2004, detectives hand-delivered a letter to hundreds of black men in South London, asking for their help in voluntarily providing DNA samples for elimination purposes. They needed to reduce the number of suspects in the operation, and this was the best way to do so. Volunteers were assured that DNA samples would be destroyed as soon as they were confirmed to be unmatched with the Minstead man's DNA. The majority of those potential suspects were eager to help if it would assist police in catching the suspect. However, 125 men initially refused to provide samples, believing that the exercise was discriminatory and breached their human rights. Police pressured those who refused, explaining that their behaviour could be construed as suspicious, and they would be arrested for suspected intimate violations. 5 men were arrested. 5 innocent men. They were, however, subsequently cleared. Although they were able to reduce the list of potential suspects from 21,000 to 1,000, police resigned themselves to being able only to obtain the DNA of certain suspects still on the list if they were arrested for an unrelated offence. But the damage was done. The incident was seen as an abuse of power, but the criticisms for the police didn't stop there. After nearly 10 years of violent attacks on the elderly, the police were desperate. Detectives flew to Trinidad to make an appeal for information, but nothing. 4 of the country's leading criminal profilers were enlisted to create a comprehensive profile of the attacker. Detectives say this provided an amazingly detailed but chilling portrait. This still brought nothing. A new appeal was broadcast on BBC's Crime Watch programme, which featured a recording of a 999 call made by one of its victims. A reward of up to £40,000 is offered to anyone who provided information that led to the man's arrest, prosecution and conviction. But still, it was fruitless. On October 13th, 2002, 10 years after the first attack, he struck again. This time he left a vital clue, a footprint from a size 10 Nike Air Terra Countego trainer. 7 confirmed attacks took place in the summer of 2003 before another gap. In 2007, the police saw the Night Stalker's pattern of behaviour changing. He became more focused on stealing money. More importantly, his careful planning was beginning to falter and mistakes were being made. The frequency was also ramping up. There was a burglary on May the 11th, 2008 in Norwood, another burglary in Downham on May the 17th, a third on June the 4th in Lee. Detectives weren't sure why, but he seemed to be getting desperate. Metropolitan Police called in Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton. Sutton had just caught Levi Belfield. Belfield was responsible for the death of Millie Dowler. and they believed Sutton was the man to help. DCI Colin Sutton said, "I had been handed a poisoned chalice. It was left to Sutton to try and catch the perpetrator. Sutton decided that the DNA evidence was proving a red herring for the police. He changed tack and decided on a new radical plan, a stakeout focusing on the attacker's favourite hunting grounds. However, CCTV cameras showed a man fitting the description running towards a vehicle. Experts were able to identify a silver Vauxhall Zafira. This was potentially the car owned by the Night Stalker. 17 days later, a member of the surveillance team noticed a similar Vauxhall in the neighbourhood. An hour later, a man was spotted running to the same car. The police sprung into action, and moments later they'd caught up to and pulled over the car. The officer who pulled the car over, David Matthews, said, "I was quite aware that if this was the suspect, that he'd be prepared to fight. We searched the car and I opened the boot. There were latex gloves, a crowbar, a balaclava in there. This appeared to be a burglar's kit. He looked at me and he said, 'What's this really about?' And I just said, 'I think you know what it's really about.' And it was like someone had switched a light out within him. His eyes glazed over and he never spoke another word. At around 2 a.m, the Night Stalker was arrested. The Night Stalker was Delroy Easton Grant. He was born in Jamaica in 1957. At 2 years old, his mother walked out of the family and left Grant in the care of his elderly grandparents. His father, a devout Christian, made the decision to move to the UK. Delroy Grant was 15 at the time, and not long after arriving in Britain, his criminal career began. It started small. At first it was petty theft, but he gradually got worse. He soon moved on to more serious offences, including burglary, later spending time in jail for armed robbery. In 1975, he met his first wife, Janet Watson. Many thought that this was the woman who could put him on the straight and narrow. Within 2 weeks, they got engaged. Janet believed she'd found her own Prince Charming, but after the wedding, things took a dramatic turn for the worse. She quickly discovered that he had an obsession with tidiness and being in control. Knives and forks needed to be in the correct drawer. If they weren't, there were consequences. Consequences that left her bloodied and bruised. Delroy Grant was a modern-day Jekyll and Hyde. In public, he knew the perfect way to behave and the right things to say, but in his own home, he was the master, in control, and his family must obey. The young couple had 2 children together, but after 5 years of Grant's abuse, Janet left. Delroy moved to Leicester, where he fathered another 2 children with a new girlfriend. This relationship didn't last too long, and in 1991 he was sent to prison for handling stolen goods. Shortly after that, the relationship ended and he headed back to South East London. It's there he met his second wife, Jennifer Edwards. She was a devoted Jehovah's Witness, and the community welcomed him in with open arms. Finally, Grant had somewhere that he belonged. The couple moved into a house in Brockley, southeast London. There they raised their 2 boys and Jennifer's 2 girls from a previous marriage. When Jennifer was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, Grant, a former assistant in a care home, had to take care of her. He became a taxi driver by night and his wife's carer by day. His neighbours admired the way that he looked after her. He was known as a pillar of the community, good-natured, always smiling, a church-going family man. But unknown to everyone around them, beneath his devious exterior lay a sadistic, brutal burglar. Someone who targeted the vulnerable elderly and subjected them to the most horrific experiences.
Delroy Grant's court appearance was brief. The many charges he faces, rape, assault and burglary, weren't even mentioned. Police were given 3 more days to question him. At his home nearby, forensic investigators were still looking for evidence against him. His alleged crimes go back 17 years, to around the time his family moved in here. Neighbours described a friendly community and a man devoted to his disabled wife.
He's such a nice guy, but I just can't. It's a shock. It's unbelievable.
You know, totally devoted to his wife and children, and as I said, it's just come to a shock in this small, tight-knit community.
In Delroy Grant's back garden, evidence of one hobby, target practice with his air rifle. According to neighbours, Delroy Grant was a familiar figure here, often seen out and about in these streets, pushing his wife Jennifer in her wheelchair. Both of them are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Delroy Grant was tight-lipped. Even after his arrest, he said nothing that could offer any explanation as to why he did the things that he did. Days after his arrest, an officer went to his cell to provide him with deodorant. He was agitated, pacing up and down in his cell. He said, "I do not want to fit anyone up." This basically means he doesn't want to snitch. When asked what he meant, he said, "Have you thought about my son, Delroy Jr.?" When asked why his son might be responsible, Grant is alleged to have said, "He lives in the right area and he is the same height as me." But when told the information would have to be passed on, Grant responded, "No, don't pass it on. I don't want to fit anyone up." After over a decade of terrorising the elderly, he wasn't ready to confess. On the 3rd of March 2011, Delroy Grant appeared at Woolwich Crown Court to face 29 charges. These range from intimate violations, indecent assaults and burglary from 1992 to 2009. He denied all counts, having previously pleaded not guilty at the hearing held at the Old Bailey. He maintained that they have the wrong man and should be arresting his eldest son from his first marriage. It was clear that Grant had awareness of the number of breakthroughs in forensics and DNA. He was hoping that his son would share the same DNA and instead be convicted for his crimes. However, the jury were told that Grant's DNA proves a perfect match to the DNA samples found at the crime scenes. Grant's first wife, Janet Watson, was put in the witness box to hear the shocking revelation that Grant also believed he was being framed by her. He alleged that Janet stole reproductive fluids and saliva from him in 1977. He said that she had made him give samples of his reproductive fluid and saliva to get him tested for an STD after she discovered he was having an affair. After the marriage ended, he alleged his DNA was stored at a hospital by a male friend. He went on to say that 15 years later, his wife, out of malice, gave the DNA to someone else, all to frame him for a string of burglaries across southeast London. Prosecutor Jonathan Laidlaw QC said, "Your defence that someone planted your DNA is a lie born out of desperation, and because you have a complete inability to face up to what you have done. You simply refuse to face up to the burglaries and to the old people you attacked over the best part of 20 years. The idea that Janet Watson, who has already suffered at your hands, was behind this elaborate scheme to frame you is, the prosecution suggests, pure fiction and fantasy invented by you from start to finish." When asked why he did not mention his claims that his ex-wife had collected these samples, Grant said, "I just did not link the two at the time." Mr. Laidlaw said, "As you sat there day after day of interviews, are you telling the jury it didn't cross your mind that she was behind this?" The prosecution claimed Grant's defense was something he had made up since his arrest, because he could not face up to the enormity of what he had done. It was a startling web of lies, because in the 70s the technique to recover DNA from male fluids and saliva hadn't even been invented. It showed the jury what a desperate man would do to avoid punishment. Mr. Laidlaw told Grant that, "We are already beginning to see that your account falls apart when it is subjected to the most gentle of examinations." Delroy Grant replied, "For what reason would I want to violate old women?" To which Mr. Laidlaw said, "That is a very good question." And he added, "If these charges weren't so grave, this would be almost laughable as an account. Ms. Watson is not behind all of these offences. She had a bad time at your hands when you and her were together. You were the softly spoken charmer. Once you were married, you treated her badly." The truth is, Ms. Watson didn't want to have anything to do with you as of 1979. The truth is, she's a thoroughly decent, hard-working mother who has had absolutely nothing to do with seeking to get you into trouble in the years that have passed. When Delroy Grant was arrested in Witham Road, Beckenham, the prosecution alleged that he was caught almost red-handed. Grant was found wearing 2 pairs of jeans and 3 t-shirts, which the defendant explained was because he had been decorating and also because it was cold. He claimed a torch found in his pocket was planted by the police, and that the crowbar found in his Vauxhall Zafira was put there by Ms. Watson's accomplice. Mr. Laidlaw said, "The luck you had had for the best part of 20 years was about to run out. You say it's not just Ms. Watson and her accomplice, but that the police have also indulged in this planting things on you." He added, "You have become a very sophisticated attacker and burglar by this stage." While his fingerprints were being taken in the police station, it was revealed in court that he arrogantly remarked, "I don't know why you're bothering. I always wear gloves." He took such lengths to avoid detection during his 17-year crime spree that not one of his fingerprints were ever detected. The jury heard about the burglary kit found in a Zafira on the night of his arrest. All of the items within it were linked to crimes carried out by the Night Stalker. To add to this, the police explained that he was wearing a burglar's kit of 2 pairs of jeans, 2 pairs of boxer shorts, 3 t-shirts and shoes but no socks. This would have allowed him to change appearance quickly, vital in helping him hide his tracks on CCTV footage. The evidence was damning. Everything pointed towards Delroy Grant. His arrest in November 2009 has been described as a fine example of good old-fashioned policing, a stakeout, a chase, and a clean arrest. But Grant could and should have been caught 10 years earlier. In May 1999, investigators received the sort of breakthrough that should have brought Grant's reign of terror to an end, stopping any more victims going through such an appalling ordeal. A member of the public witnessed a man acting suspiciously near the scene of a burglary in Bromley. They took a note of the registration number of the BMW they saw him getting into. Checking the vehicle details against the DVLA records, police ascertained that the BMW belonged to a man by the name of Delroy Easton Grant. Spotting that the burglary bore a number of similarities to the Night Stalker attacks, they referred it to Scotland Yard's Operation Minstead team. But a rookie detective accessed the wrong Delroy Grant, who, unlike the attacker, was already on the National DNA database. So when police checked his forensics against the sample left at the scene of an earlier attack, there was no match. Police went to Delroy Grant's home in South London, but their inquiries weren't thorough enough. An officer spoke to his wife and she confirmed that the suspect's car seen near the burglary did belong to them. But inexplicably, police never went to speak to Delroy Grant himself. In August 1999, Delroy Grant from South London, the Night Stalker, was ruled out. A spokesman for the Independent Police Complaints Commission said it was a simple misunderstanding which had horrific consequences. Grant went on to commit a further 146 offences after the blunder. In 2001, police received another potential clue. A caller to Crime Stoppers said an e-fit of the offender resembled a man working in a children's home, a man named Delroy Grant. Police now say that they do not regard this as a missed opportunity because the information they were given at the time was sketchy. The caller said the e-fit also looked like someone else. But both near misses in 1999 and 2001 raised questions about Operation Minstead, the operation that was meant to catch the Night Stalker. While it was nearly 2 decades too late, the court case was damning for Delroy Easton Grant. On the 24th of March 2011, the jury found him guilty on all 29 charges. He was given 4 life sentences. Police still believed he may have been responsible for another 600 attacks. Delroy Grant is still in HM Prison, Belmarsh. Now aged 65, he should never see freedom again.